Have you ever seen someone completely lose it over something as simple as a funeral procession? Well, that's exactly what happened when one HOA Karen decided to hijack a grieving family's procession, and it didn't end well for her. Picture this. A quiet, respectful event to honor a loved one turns into utter chaos, all because one woman thought she could impose her will in the most inappropriate way. This story starts off like any other funeral, people mourning, cars slowly making their way to the cemetery. But then, out of nowhere, a woman from the neighborhood, known for her over-the-top HOA antics, decides to intervene. She blocks the entire procession, starts yelling at the drivers, and even demands they move. At first, it's unclear what her problem is, but soon enough, it becomes clear she's crossing a line. Little did she know, what she was doing was not only disrespectful, but also a criminal offense. But that's not where the story ends. The situation escalates quickly, and before long, the police are involved, leading to an arrest. How did it all spiral so out of control? And what happened to the woman who thought she could get away with it? Stay tuned, because this one takes some unexpected turns. To fully understand how this all unfolded, let's take a step back. The woman at the center of this fiasco wasn't just any neighbor. She was the type of HOA Karen who thought she had a say in everything, from the color of your mailbox to how many guests you could have at a barbecue. Her name was Karen, of course, and she'd earned a reputation for being the enforcer of the neighborhood's strict rules, no matter how minor or ridiculous they were. The family of the deceased, a couple who'd lived in the area for years, had just lost their father, a well-respected man who'd spent his life giving back to the community. The funeral procession was meant to be a peaceful, somber event, with a long line of cars driving to the cemetery. But as soon as they approached the intersection near Karen's house, she appeared, standing right in the middle of the road. At first, the drivers thought she was just in the way, but then she started waving her arms and shouting, demanding the cars turn around. It didn't make any sense. This wasn't her road to control. There were no signs, no barricades, just a woman with a lot of misplaced authority. People in the procession tried to reason with her, but Karen was unyielding, almost as if she enjoyed causing a scene. And that's when things started to spiral. What was supposed to be a respectful tribute was quickly turning into a nightmare. As the procession came to a halt, confusion spread like wildfire among the drivers. Some people tried honking, hoping Karen would get out of the way, while others began rolling down their windows to plead for her to move. But Karen didn't seem fazed. She stood firm in the road, her arms crossed, as if she had all the time in the world to argue. Her face twisted with a strange combination of defiance and superiority. "This is a private road," she insisted loudly, "and you're all blocking traffic." For the family, it felt like a nightmare. They had just buried their loved one, and now, on the way to the cemetery, they were stuck in this absurd standoff. The widow, visibly distraught, got out of the car to confront Karen, hoping to appeal to her humanity. "Please, we're just trying to bury my husband," she begged, but Karen wasn't hearing it. In her mind, this was her turf, and no one was going to tell her otherwise. A few of the neighbors, who had witnessed Karen's behavior before, began to murmur among themselves. Some of them sided with the family, urging Karen to stop being so unreasonable, but others, those who feared Karen's wrath, remained silent, too afraid to speak up. Meanwhile, the tension kept building. It wasn't just a fight over a road anymore. It was about power, control, and a woman who had clearly gone too far. As minutes ticked by, it became clear that Karen wasn't about to move. And that's when things took another dark turn. The family, fed up with trying to reason with her, decided to call the police. They couldn't believe they had to resort to this just to bury their loved one. But even as they dialed the number, Karen seemed to grow more confident, as if she knew that her actions were about to escalate. And in that moment, the real conflict was just beginning. The moments felt like hours. The procession, now at a complete standstill, was becoming an increasingly chaotic scene. The widow, her face streaked with tears, kept trying to calm her children, who were visibly upset by the absurdity of it all. The family's friends and extended relatives began stepping out of their cars, some in disbelief, others simply exhausted by the situation. The police had been called, but they were still a few minutes away. In the meantime, Karen seemed to grow bolder by the second. "I've had enough of this," she shouted, shaking her finger at the family. "This is my neighborhood, and I won't let you break the rules." Her voice was rising, her hands trembling with what seemed like a mix of fury and fear. It was hard to tell. She wasn't acting like someone simply trying to make a point. She was acting like someone who feared losing control. The tension in the air was thick, and whispers started circulating among the crowd. Some people were starting to take out their phones, recording the bizarre encounter, while others grew impatient, eager to continue with their mourning. The longer it dragged on, the more it felt like a standoff, a battle of wills. Suddenly, Karen began to step forward, right toward the widow, as if challenging her to take the next step. "Move your car," she demanded, as though she had the right to dictate everything that was happening. The widow, her heart pounding in her chest, stood her ground. "No, Karen, we're not moving. This is a funeral, and you're not going to ruin it." Just as Karen raised her hand, whether to yell or strike, no one knew, the sound of sirens cut through the air, and the crowd froze. Everyone turned their heads as two police cars screeched to a stop at the intersection. The officers quickly stepped out, but the scene wasn't calming down. It felt like something was about to break, but no one knew which way it would go. Would Karen finally back down, or would she escalate things further? Would the police be able to restore order before things spun completely out of control? The next few moments held the kind of tension that everyone could feel in their bones, and there was no telling how it was going to end. The police officers quickly assessed the situation, their hands resting on their belts as they glanced between Karen and the grieving family. The crowd held its breath, unsure of what would happen next. But just as one officer began walking toward Karen, another, a younger cop with a stern face, was approached by someone in the crowd, a neighbor who had been watching from the sidelines. The neighbor, a man who had been quietly observing the scene from his car, suddenly stepped forward, his voice low but urgent. "Officer, I saw the whole thing," he said, pulling out his phone. "I've got footage." The officer raised an eyebrow, but nodded for him to continue. As the man started playing the video, it became clear that things weren't as simple as they appeared. The footage showed the procession approaching, the widow's car in the lead, when Karen had first appeared in the road. But it wasn't just her blocking the cars. She was seen aggressively waving her arms and yelling at drivers, even trying to force them off the road. But the twist came when the camera zoomed in on something no one had noticed before. Karen had not been standing alone. There was a second figure with her, someone who appeared to be pulling strings behind the scenes. The camera had caught a brief glimpse of a man in the background, standing near Karen's driveway, watching the scene unfold with a strange, almost smug expression. The man was quickly identified by the officer as another member of the neighborhood HOA board, someone known for being even more extreme than Karen. But why was he involved? Was he behind Karen's sudden outburst? The officers exchanged wary glances, their initial judgment now clouded by this new information. Could this be more than just a crazy neighbor going rogue? Was this part of a bigger plan to intimidate the residents? With the police now fully aware of this hidden layer, the tension in the air only thickened. The widow, who had been holding herself together, suddenly seemed more alert, as if the pieces of a larger puzzle were beginning to fall into place. It wasn't just one crazy neighbor, it was something far more coordinated. And as the officers took note of the new evidence, it became clear. The stakes were much higher than anyone had anticipated. The realization hit like a ton of bricks. The officers, now fully aware of the deeper involvement of the HOA board member, quickly shifted gears. The younger cop, who had been watching Karen, stepped forward and motioned for her to step aside. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and move to the side of the road," he ordered, his voice firm. Karen hesitated for a split second, but with the weight of the evidence mounting, she knew she had no choice. Her posture slumped, and she reluctantly took a few steps back. But just as things seemed to be heading toward resolution, the true shocker came. The other officer, who had been reviewing the footage, suddenly looked up, his eyes wide in disbelief. "Wait, there's more," he muttered. The video showed not just the man from the HOA board standing in the background, but also exchanging a quick handshake with Karen just before she stormed into the road to block the procession. The man, now identified as a key member of the HOA who had been trying to push the widow and her family out of the neighborhood for months, was quickly taken into custody. As he was led away in handcuffs, his face twisted in anger, revealing just how far he was willing to go to intimidate the family. The widow, standing there in shock, was left to process the truth. This had all been part of a larger, more sinister plan. But just as the situation seemed to wind down, another car pulled up to the scene. A black SUV, tinted windows dark enough to hide the driver's identity, rolled to a stop. The crowd turned, unsure of who could possibly be arriving now. The door opened, and out stepped a woman, dressed in formal black attire, a high-profile lawyer, and the final twist in the story. It was the widow's estranged sister, someone the family hadn't heard from in years. She walked toward the scene with purpose, her heels clicking on the pavement. "You thought this was just about a funeral," she said, her voice cold and controlled, "but you've just uncovered something much bigger." She revealed that Karen and the HOA board had been using their power to intimidate families in the neighborhood for years, slowly pushing out anyone who didn't conform to their narrow vision. But now, with the arrest of both Karen and the HOA member, the whole thing was about to unravel, and the widow's sister, with her legal connections, was ready to expose it all. The story that had begun as a simple, tragic funeral procession had now turned into a battle for justice, and what had started as a single act of defiance had sparked a chain reaction that could bring down the entire HOA. But as the widow looked at her sister, standing firm and ready to fight, she couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. And as the cameras captured the scene, it was clear. This was a fight that wouldn't just end with Karen's arrest, it was the start of a much larger war.